Story 1. Public Broadcasting Service NewsHour has frequently been ranked as the most objective broadcast news show. Story 2. The Financial Times is very dry, but wealthy people prefer clear, factual reporting so they know how to manage their money. Story 3. National Public Radio and the Associated Press can be boring sometimes, but they are usually less dramatic and more factual. Story 4. ProPublica is good for national news. For local coverage, look for nonprofit outlets that cover your state and city. Story 5. I am shocked at how many people mention the British Broadcasting Corporation, especially given that there are many voices in the United Kingdom who have pointed out that the British Broadcasting Corporation was compromised long ago and is biased. Story 6. I think this has been suggested elsewhere, but for more visibility, Heather Cox Richardson is a national treasure and brilliant. Story 7. I like the Associated Press. It is as unbiased as you can get, and it is a non-profit cooperative. Until recently, the British Broadcasting Corporation was good, but now there are too many ads, and in the United States you must pay to access many of its articles. Story 8. The Associated Press won big points with me for refusing to go along with Trump's bullshit over the Gulf of Mexico. Story 9. I usually listen to the weekly Executive Disorder podcast on It Could Happen Here. The main host is a highly experienced journalist who has covered everything from wars to comedy, and the less experienced host is a medical doctor. They clearly care about accuracy. During early reports about the Charlie Kirk shooter, they emphasized they would not assume anything and stated only the facts as they understood them, and they noted there was no evidence the shooter was a groyper. When they make a mistake, they openly correct it. Their opinions are left-leaning, but they are also extremely critical of BlueAnon and will call it out. They are not BuzzFeed style like Midas Touch, which I can't stand even though I share similar politics. One of their hosts is very good on international politics. Story 10. I like Ground News. It is the only news app one pay for because it provides the same news from multiple viewpoints, so I can see how something is reported by the left, the right, and the center. Story 11. Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network focuses not on events, but on what people think. It is democracy unfiltered. Story 12. These are probably the international outlets of the British Broadcasting Corporation or of Al Jazeera. However, Qatar has some unusual relations with Donald Trump right now, so it is unclear. Story 13. Reuters and the Associated Press are followed by the classic broadcast network evening news shows National Broadcasting Company Nightly News, American Broadcasting Company World News Tonight, and Public Broadcasting Service NewsHour, and then by niche print long-form reporting sources such as The Economist, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, and The New Yorker. Story 14. I prefer the British Broadcasting Corporation news. It is as close to classic 1970s-style journalism as we can get these days. Story 15. The Tangle newsletter is generally less hyperbolic. I have never seen them write the word slammed or eviscerated. Story 16. Democracy Now! I hope this is mentioned more prominently. Story 17. The Economist, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal. Story 18. The Ground News app has a free version that provides news from multiple sources and rates each source as left-leaning, center, or right-leaning. I like it. Story 19. ProPublica and the Tampa Bay Times are both non-profit organizations dedicated to journalism. The Payday Report is a one-person operation run by labor reporter Mike Elk, who has reported for years and is highly credible. Matt Stoller's big newsletter on Substack specializes in covering antitrust issues. He is an expert in that area. Story 20. The most credible news sources covering the United States are generally those that prioritize fact-based, nonpartisan reporting. These include Associated Press, a nonprofit cooperative and wire service that provides neutral, raw reporting to thousands of other news outlets worldwide. Reuters, a global news agency known for rapid, accurate, and unbiased coverage, particularly in finance and international news. The Wall Street Journal. Its news section is highly respected for in-depth, factual business and political reporting, though its opinion pages are known to lean conservative. British Broadcasting Corporation. As a British public broadcaster, its United States coverage is often viewed as more objective due to its distance from American political biases. These organizations are considered credible because they adhere to rigorous journalistic standards maintain a clear distinction between news and opinion, and rely on verifiable sources. They also have a history of being highly rated for reliability by independent media watchdogs like Adfontes Media and Pew Research Center. Story 21. I have actually been getting most of my news from international sources such as the British Broadcasting Corporation, the Japan Times, Al Jazeera, and other European sites. I also read a lot from The Guardian, but I am fully aware that it has a decidedly liberal slant, which is fine since I am a far-left liberal. Story 22. Aside from the ones already mentioned, Al Jazeera English is my go-to. Yes, I realize it is biased in other ways, but they do not fawn over the United States the way Canadian, British, and other media do. Story 23. Associated Press, Reuters, and ProPublica. Other news sources can do a good job with analysis and sometimes even primary reporting, but you need to be more discerning. I listen to National Public Radio in the car. The cable satellite public affairs network is good for watching committees and similar proceedings. Story 24. Democracy Now! Is the only national news source worth paying attention to. Story 25. Ground news shows the political leanings of a story and presents all sides to viewers. Story 26. Ground news shows bias in news headlines and presents facts. Story 27. Watchbook Television or the Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network, when they run live coverage of the House and Senate. Story 28. Heather Cox Richardson is where it's at. I start my day listening to the previous day's letter. Story 29. I mostly do not follow American news outlets. I am Canadian, so I rely mainly on Global and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I think The Guardian and Reuters are reliable. As for American news, I think National Public Radio and Microsoft Network are doing okay. I like Rachel Maddow. I am not sure if you would count it, but Last Week Tonight with John Oliver is very good. Story 30. Agenda-free television on YouTube. It is the best source for breaking news, with lots of facts, data, and updates. No guests, no editorials, and no political opinions. Host Steve Lukiner keeps politics and opinions out of the coverage. I know it may seem sketchy, but give it a try. Story 31. If I say Al Jazeera, do I get a swift kick in the ass from this dog's hit administration? Story 32. Ground news, probably. Nothing beats doing your own due diligence, though. Story 33. Al Jazeera always reports everything as it is when it happens. Story 34. News sources outside of the United States include Al Jazeera, Le Monde, and so on. Story 35. The Associated Press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal are not perfect, but they are the best we have. Story 36. The most neutral sources are the Associated Press, Reuters, and the British Broadcasting Corporation, rounded out with National Public Radio and the Wall Street Journal for slight left and right-leaning perspectives, while remaining generally reliable sources. Story 37. As a Canadian, I find the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news factual, in-depth, and professional. Story 38. Just off the top of my head, I do not really know, but Thomson Reuters and the British Broadcasting Corporation. Story 39. I use Google News. It highlights hot topics and provides multiple sources, so you can see stories from all venues and get a widespread view of each topic. Story 40. I like The Independent when I am on a computer. It seems fairly unbiased. I use the Ground News application on my phone. It shows news biases. Story 41. Naked Capitalism is a well-curated aggregator with a well-moderated comments section. If Smith is my hero. Story 42. Lately, I have been following Kyle Kulinski's YouTube channel, Secular Talk. Story 43. A daily short history lesson relating to current events. Story 44. The major news agencies are the Associated Press and Reuters. For commentary, it is difficult to give general recommendations. I prefer non-United States media because most United States outlets tend to be biased. The Economist does a good job, in my opinion. Story 45. A news source that does not have to please employees or shareholders, and that admits when it is wrong or does not know something. Story 46. I rely on Ground News. It aggregates different news outlets that report on a story and shows how each source leans politically. Also check its blind spots, which are stories that receive no coverage from certain sources depending on whether they lean left or right. Story 47. I suggest the British Broadcasting Corporation for straight news, PEP with Chaz and Dr. Dave for commentary. If you want to know about the United States, you need the United Kingdom and Australia. Americans are too caught up in themselves, you need to go outside the bubble. Story 48. Reuters, Associated Press, British Broadcasting Corporation News, The New York Times, The Guardian, Reddit. Minimal bias. No rage bait. Not dumbed down. Story 49. The British Broadcasting Corporation's news coverage has some areas of bias, but is overall fairly objective in its reporting on American news. Story 50. Ground News provides a solid side-by-side comparison of events. Story 51. Alternative media sources, such as Judging Freedom on YouTube. Story 52. I haven't seen it mentioned during a brief scroll, but Wired magazine has done excellent independent journalism. Story 53. Of course, Fox News only tells the truth and is very neutral. Story 54. Marketplace on National Public Radio has both a morning report and an afternoon report. There is also a podcast, Make Me Smart, which recaps events of the day and week and is informative and entertaining. Story 55. Talking Points memo is left-leaning, but its analysis is second to none. It is fiercely independent, and I have supported it for nearly 15 years. Story 56. Unfortunately, almost any government or financially influenced source in the United States, such as television news, newspapers, and similar outlets, has engaged in extensive spin and whitewashing and largely avoids reporting on corporate influence. That makes it much harder to find reliable information, even from sources we used to trust. One thing that can be said universally is that television news is no longer reputable. You are now more likely to learn from satirical or comedic news programs than from traditional outlets. Story 57. About 50 sources seem to be the answer, according to Reddit users. Story 58. Associated Press. You can also check the Ad Fontes Media interactive chart to see how your favorite news site lines up. Story 59. Probably cable news network. Everybody thinks they are in the bag for the other side. Story 60. I use an application called AskReddit to follow several local and international news sources at the same time. You can add keywords to mute or mute undesired sources to keep your news feed free of unwanted articles. Story 61. I like the Wall Street Journal. The opinion columns are written by a pack of rabid dogs, but the reporters are excellent. Story 62. Ruth Ben-Ghiat has been the most prescient and puts everything into historical context. Story 63. Credible to exactly what? Israel? Bribes? Propaganda? The problem is it was everything. Influencers, social media, and supposedly independent so-called real news. There are two sides to every story. Credibility now depends on which side of the fence you are on. I know I am going to take heat, but one side is right and one side is wrong. Both sides are guilty. That is what makes unbiased news a thing of the past. I never thought I would miss Tom Brokaw. Story 64. They all push what they want you to hear and never present the entire story. Some choose to deflect and confuse the audience. When did Walter Cronkite have two guest speakers for every story? Story 65. Watch Devory Darkins. The objective is to present actual documentation and the cases under discussion and to explain the arguments from both sides. Story 66. There aren't any credible news sources. They are a politically driven mix of monopolized businesses that exist for advertising dollars, not for your entertainment. Look at Kimmel's Bit situation and tell me what is credible. Story 67. I haven't allowed myself to watch the news for almost a year because I can't handle it. When I watched, I trusted National Broadcasting Company news. I still consulted other reliable sources to verify certain things. Even Lester Holt downplayed the genocide in Palestine. Story 68. Read as many sources as you have time for. Do not trust any single source. Everyone has a slant. Compare multiple sources on a story. What they agree on are the facts, and what they disagree on is opinion. Story 69. I like Rachel Maddow. She is very bright, and her presentations and interviews are always interesting. I also like Anderson Cooper, Lawrence O'Donnell, and Ari Melber. I mostly watch the Microsoft and the National Broadcasting Company cable network, although I know Anderson Cooper is not with that network. I follow the British Broadcasting Corporation, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, National Public Radio, the Associated Press, and Reuters. I'm going to check out the woman you all keep mentioning, plus a few others. Thanks for the tips. Story 70. It depends on the topic. Each is biased, which is why it is a good idea to pool information from multiple sources. Story 71. My original morning stack was the New York Times newsletter, the British Broadcasting Corporation, Al Jazeera, and Fox News. This gave me a range of coverage to help offset reporting bias. Since the United States election, my current stack is the New York Times newsletter, the 1440 newsletter, the Google News aggregator, and X. The idea is to get a range of coverage and multiple views on events. Originally, and since its inception, my go-to news source was the cable news network. However, I felt it became ineffective after Donald Trump was elected the first time. Humorously, the cable news network complained about Fox News so much that I decided to check Fox News for the fun of it and kept it as my main source of conservative views. After the last election, I found X to be a better source of conservative views, with a sprinkling of liberal views. I do not think of any source as news any longer. I regard them as sources of punditry, spin, and propaganda, so I have to sift out real news by comparing what they all say. I read my stack of sources and then do my morning workout while I process, both logically and emotionally, the cacophony of views. Story 72. There is no such thing as credible news. I believe Phineas Taylor Barnum coined the phrase, "There is a sucker born every minute." Story 73. News is a lazy business. If the media is popular enough to get your attention, it means somebody put big money into it to sell influence or to blackmail adversaries. All journalists are paid just to be faces for the sham. Some are lucky Fiverr-level comedians, and the rest are the owner's family or friends. Story 74. Always remember, any news outlet is a business that sells advertising. That's how they make the big bucks. The truth is not an obstacle to their reporting. That applies to all outlets. Story 75. Unbiased foreign news that considers each outlet's relationship with the United States. I prefer news from Singapore, such as the Straits Times, but I also read Al Jazeera sometimes. United States sources are often heavily politically slanted, except for some small local reporting. Story 76. Brian Tyler Cohen and David Pakman. I do not trust traditional news media anymore. Story 77. Breaking Points usually has decent takes on the news. Sagar is very neutral, but his co-host Crystal is clearly biased. I usually listen when she's not on the show. Story 78. United Kingdom news has been my go-to since April. I also watched some Canadian news, but as for the United States, it is America's most watched news network with the most watched news anchor, our very own David Muir, on American Broadcasting Company's World News Tonight. Story 79. Today, the most credible source of news is descriptions by ordinary internet users about their own country, rather than descriptions by the news media or by internet users about other countries. Story 80. The free press. They are interested in the truth even if it doesn't align with their politics. Story 81. Without a doubt, Ken Klippenstein. Everything else is biased as hell. Reuters, the Associated Press, Fox News, and the British Broadcasting Corporation. Story 82. There are no credible news sources in the United States. Story 83. X has been a reliable source and allows fact-checking with community notes and grok. Story 84. Only 3. One American News and Real America's Voice for television. The Washington Times for newspapers. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.